Welcome, everybody, to this Thursday edition of Let's Build. Talking about onboarding again every Thursday with Willem. Uh, I am off site trying to do this from a hotel, and we're hopeful that we can broadcast some good content today. At the very least, we know we'll end up with a good recording, but that's why I'm off cam. Meanwhile, stream is looking good from the LinkedIn side. Willem, how you doing today?
Not bad at all. But I assume that you have the camera on not just because of bandwidth issues, but because you're sitting by the pool as well.
Uh, I wish, I wish. Not the case, not the case. The sacrifice I make to educate our loving HubSpot fans.
Yeah, exactly. So we're here today to talk about the onboarding. Last week we talked about a number of things, and where we basically ended was like, okay, what exactly is onboarding? What do we try to achieve with onboarding? And we didn't actually go into the steps, and we would do that this week. So for this week, my main goal is to try to walk us through the steps, and we're gonna basically stop at the last step, which, to give a bit of a spoiler, which is a portal audit, because a portal audit, as you probably know yourself, can be a beast in itself. So how does that sound?
Yes, not that sounds great. And I definitely think we should try to give the audit its own space because a lot of people think about a lot of different things when it comes to audits, and I know we'll need to cover that from maybe a few different angles. But yeah, let's looking forward to running through, what the rest of the process looks like with you today.
Perfect. Let me try to also put my screen in the right mode. And try to share that. Let's see if that actually works. So you should be able to see the PowerPoint presentation. And that basically
Yes,
is the fundamentals of onboarding. What are the key steps that we take customers through? And one of the important things is that there are different ways of doing an onboarding. What we will address today is what I call a guided onboarding. That means that the customers do most of the heavy lifting themselves, and you just, as a partner or as HubSpot does it, guide the customer through the process. Because you've done a lot of very valuable podcasts, Chris, including process mapping. Is that part of onboarding or not? Including building a quote. Is that part of onboarding or not? Building the playbooks. All that sort of stuff does for me not necessarily fall under the onboarding, because onboarding is just creating the initial or the first impact. So when we start with that, one of the important things is alignment. What are we actually going to do? And that is something that we should have full alignment on. What are the goals? So what have we actually sold? And if that's a point solution, that's fine. And I know customer platform, that sort of thing. I'm going to say again, for me, that's fine during the onboarding process. And we'll get to the platform bit actually at the very last bit of the onboarding. So for me, at this point, we're just trying to achieve the first value. And that partially also is the setup of the portal. So at this point, you really want to send the customer the information. And if you're the customer yourself, you should maybe ask, if the partner or if HubSpot doesn't come up with that, what should I do? what templates should I have in place? Should I have not just for the landing pages, but what should I actually be thinking about? What integrations should I have? Let's just say that a customer goes through onboarding without them connecting Gmail if they use Gmail, or Outlook if they use Outlook, because that wasn't in the key requirements. For me, that is just plain wrong. You should really start with the basics, and often integrations are part of that. It's a little bit like some others have said, getting an iPhone and saying, no, I'm not going to install apps. Realistically, just about everybody does, and it makes sense. So how do you pick the integrations?
Yeah. And so if we can just like dig into that point, like, because what inevitably happens when we don't start with the basics?
Yeah, is that a question, or do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, I think it's like instead you start working through these other things that, we know that they want to get done. And then you run into, oh yeah, we got to connect your email for this thing to work. Oh yeah, we got to connect your calendar. Oh yeah, like there's no skipping of the basics. That's why they're the basics, right?
Yes. And if we think, for instance, about creating a template for web pages and for landing pages, that takes time. Why not start with that straight away? If you also think about actually connecting your domain, wouldn't that be handy if you start off sending emails and that sort of thing? Wouldn't that be handy if you want to live test something? So for me, that really is about, those are the basics. As the onboarder, you can actually create one single email saying, these are the things that you need to set up. Do you have, for instance, a WordPress website? If so, do you have the tracking code installed? And of course, if you use Content Hub and host your website on HubSpot, you don't need to take care of that. That's all taken care of for you. But there are a lot of things that you really need to consider, and that you should feel like, let's get that out of the way as quickly as possible so we can focus on what's most important. Any thoughts about that, Chris?
Yeah,
And
I think that's a good point where no matter how much of the basics, finding that line right now is challenging for like, we were talking with Lucy yesterday about like how to like all the things that we know we must cover with a super admin, and like where do you kind of cross the bridge to like, okay, at this point it it depends on the business and how they're going to use HubSpot, right? Like in that case you just described, where uh in the past and even now, like when most people don't kind of think of HubSpot as the website host, a basic thing is adding the tracking code to wherever your website is. And that's like, okay, if you decided to use HubSpot as your website, CMS, now you don't have to do that step. So I think finding that line to know, like, okay, we're going to cover this with every single person, no matter what. And we're going to cover these things with most people. But here's what happens when you don't. This is the time to skip. So I think it's just interesting to kind of hear that from your perspective. And I think you just gave a great example.
yeah, but it's also like setting up the templates for landing pages and web pages. And as you know, landing pages and web pages from a templating perspective are somewhat similar. In HubSpot, of course, a web page can have the menu and that sort of thing. But setting stuff like that up, let's say that you're a marketer, you try to build a campaign, and what you figure out as soon as you want to create a landing page is, gosh, There's nothing there. Now what? That means that you don't necessarily get the initial impact that you wanted to create, because as a marketeer, likely the first impact was run a campaign. And that is where I really feel like try to think things through, try to really think about the first impact that you're trying to achieve and everything surrounding that. And that is part of the portal setup. That isn't necessarily everything, because you should also think about, do I actually have access? Do the right people have access? And with that, there should be also some thought about, okay, what is the handover process that's actually happening? What kind of automation should I have in place? And how will that actually happen? And what I think that we kind of missed is that in the first stage, so even likely at the client preparation, there is a kickoff call, and that kind of speaks for itself. But the kickoff call is so important, because realistically, that is where you create alignment. That's where you're going to start by saying, if we don't set up the portal, this is where we will fail. And if that's not clear from the get-go, then that makes everything a lot harder. If you don't make clear, you need to have a commitment as a customer. Then what? So if we talk about sorry, Chris.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. And I think from here I'll probably let you go, or not let you go, but like kind of present the rest of the information here as my bandwidth continues to be spotty. But I'll just say, like, that expectation setting is like priority. It's got to be priority one, both from here's what we're going to do, but here's what happens when we're not committed to this process as well, to make it clear, like, here's where you're going to, like, you're not going to realize your goals here if you're not committed to these things that we're laying out. So getting that commitment up front, and from the onboarding perspective and from the partner, like we can't like force them to do anything. All we can do is make it very clear what the consequences will be if they don't follow through on their side.
Yeah. And with that, for me, this isn't just for the partners or the HubSpotters trying to do an onboarding. It's also, if you're the receiving end, if you're the customer and you get the onboarding, what happens if you don't go through with that? What if you're the customer that's about to sign and you haven't thought about, like, who will actually go through the onboarding? Who will actually talk about the marketing, sales, and service handoff? How that process will actually go? If you're a marketeer and it's just like, yeah, you know what? Set up a campaign, create a bunch of SQLs, throw them over the fence, and I don't know, maybe something will happen, maybe it won't. It really is, for me, about the process and about trying to make sure that you have alignment, not just within a certain team, but if you purchase HubSpot, and I hope most of us realize that if you're a partner and doing onboarding, you need to create the value, the initial impact value with the customer. But if you're the customer, how do you make sure that you receive that initial impact and that you build from there? And part of that is process. And I know that's a little bit late, but that's what it really boils down to. So what will be the handover? What will be the criteria? And how can we automate as much as possible? And the quick example there, and without getting into the details, is you had a chat about the playbooks that are in Sales Hub Enterprise. That's a perfect example of automating something. But is that something that you just need to touch upon during the onboarding and say, look, this is possible. Try to set this up and try to make sure that it works. And from my perspective, as somebody who onboards customers, it is your job to try to teach the people what a playbook is. And that's it. I mean, after that, the customers should take it on themselves to build out the process, or there should be a retainer as a partner or something like that, where you help them to keep building it out, because it's not a full portal build out. It's just onboarding. But while building that out, you should also look for the quick wins. If you had a customer that actually wanted to achieve, I don't know, let's say, for instance, running a full marketing campaign, including the automation, what else can you potentially bring in there? What are the things that they can actually get the most value out of, which is relatively easy to build out? And I'm going to give a quick example. I had one of my customers where they really just wanted a website, but it was really easy to say, you know what, I'm going to create a small module. I'm going to run a GraphQL query, and I'm going to present that information, including all the customers' information about a certain, well, let's come up with an example, because I'm not going to use the exact example of the customer. But let's say the customer has vehicles, and we're going to basically load in all the information about the vehicles in a website. How much value can you give to a customer by showing this is possible? I'm not going to build it out for you. Is this something that you would potentially be interested in? And there's a fair chance that the customer will be really open for that at that point. And as a partner, that will likely generate additional revenue for you. So that's also something where I don't just see onboarding from a partner perspective or from a customer perspective as we need to just stick to our swim lanes and only do that. No, let's see, now that we have a closer look inside of the business, what else can we generate ROI out of? What are the quick wins?
Yeah, I think this it keeps coming up, and I'm trying to think of, better ways to explain this and clearer ways and different ways, because a lot of people are having issues with this right now. And it's almost like we're kind of recycling the initial process, where we're at another point where it's just like, hey, we're creating awareness around the tool, the platform that they have purchased, right? And that really, the awareness plus connecting, some of the basic dots, for it to work for you, but the rest, like you say, it's not realistic to build some of this stuff out as a part of the onboarding process. But what we can do is create that awareness around, confirmation of the things you stated that you wanted. Here's the awareness of getting those things done, but here's also the awareness of the things around you that, we think will be valuable for you as well.
And it's exactly like you say, it is about building the awareness, but how much does it help you as a partner with creating revenue? And I'm going to say that that's also quite important for you as a person. On the other hand, if you look at it from the customer's perspective, and as a customer, I just bought a platform for Marketing Hub to create a campaign. And, ooh, you know what? It also builds a landing page. Now that's fantastic. What if I don't know that it can do so much more? And as the onboarder didn't tell me where will I get that information and how and why would I do that? Well, if during the onboarding phase you do a little bit of discovery, and I'm just saying a little bit, you do a little bit of not staying in the swim lane and actually doing something that will have an impact, I think that that will help as a partner yourself a lot. I think that as a customer, it will expand your view to not just a CRM, but a platform. And I think that that's a win-win. So from the setup perspective, if you're in marketing, I would really suggest try to run a full inbound campaign. It doesn't have to have everything, but really try to make sure that, because this is the scenario that most customers are looking for Marketing Hub. And with building a complete campaign, of course, that includes a landing page. Of course, that includes inbound campaign, so marketing emails. Of course, that includes workflows, but it also includes the handoff. Because at what point are you actually going to say, this is good enough? I'm going to throw it over the fence. And do we actually throw it over the fence? How does that look like? What kind of information do you want to have in there? If you have a version of Sales Hub, try to really execute on a deal from a prospect to close one. So the moment you get the deal in from marketing, what actually happened? And do you get the deal in from marketing? Do you do your own prospecting? How does that work? And this is also where, you should consider integrations like Clay. Clay is fantastic, but there are so many more that you could actually look into to get more information from. But make sure that you don't go for bot lists and with zero intent, just dial for dollars or spam the crap out of everybody. That's really not what you want to do. But how does that process look like? Can we map that out? And we build the full cycle on that. And from a service perspective, it really depends what you try to achieve with service. But most customers set up a support system. Is that all you need to do? I'm going to have some questions around that, because I feel like if we talk about the low-hanging fruit, I really would like to see that everybody who goes through service onboarding also is introduced to surveys, and that in a lot of cases you can just send a survey whenever a deal is, I don't know, closed won maybe, but I'm really going to argue about closed lost as well. Because shouldn't we just send a survey out if certain criteria are met and somebody was closed, lost? Why was that the case? What did you think about the experience? And I think that that is one really good example that if you build out that sort of awareness and somebody purchased the CRM suite, they will have adopted Service Hub, even if they don't have a support system in there. And I think that that's pretty important to make sure that everybody sees the value in everything.
So,
but yeah,
what is your approach? Because there's so many hornet's nests hiding here.
Oh yeah.
When you get to any of these, especially sales, and it's clear that there is no documented process. Like they have trouble defining stages and things like that. How do you kind of balance that with with the, I guess, the pre-built out of the box stuff? Do you use that to kind of, hey, let's set it up and then figure out your stages later? How do you approach that?
For me, everything is about what suits the customer. And HubSpot is meant to, if you look at the default stages, for instance, it's meant to kind of solve for, I'm going to say 60% of the customers. So are you sure that you're within that 60%? What exactly is your process? And that is where I kind of overlap in this part with somebody else that you had as a guest in the process in the podcast, and that's about mapping your processes. How exactly is the process, and what stages do you really need? What we see a lot is that you have the I'm gonna say not that mature companies, without meaning this disrespectful in any way, but really the growing companies that try to start out with the simplest possible process. And if we talk about deal stages, for instance, they typically have around 6 deal stages. Then they mature a little bit more, and that goes up to anywhere from 10 to, I think, 23 is the highest that I've seen.
Oh,
And then
wow.
they mature a little bit more and they go back to 6 or 7. So for a lot of companies that just do their own thing, they will not follow best practices. And I think that this, during the onboarding, it isn't just about setting it up. It's about making sure the customer understands that they have a good starting point. And I hope you understand. I'm not saying to anybody that 23 deal stages is a good idea.
Yes. Yes. Usually not. Usually that means, at least in my experience, is that we're doing a little more than just sales management inside of the deal pipeline at this point. And we've seen, like there's purchasing processes built in, and then there's operations stuff that gets built in. There's post sales stuff. Uh, so I like what you say there about like, even when you run into that, and even when we're talking about awareness of the product, there's always an awareness of the strategy. And while not all the best practices are going to apply to all companies, in these cases, I think HubSpot has done a great job in terms of like building these guardrails naturally into the product versus like the scenarios where you hear, like for me, it's much more common to hear about walking into the Salesforce instance that is a complete mess than I
Yeah.
hear that about HubSpot. And that's largely because you're not starting from a blank slate in HubSpot. And, you know, this this approach to customizability versus standardization, like, I think has gone a long way to help keep things, you know, provide some safety for people that are just coming into this and trying to do this the right way, but also apply it to the business, uh, and then start somewhere, right? Uh, so I think this was a great, kind of starting point today,
Yeah, the only
for
thing
our
that I still want
continuation.
to mention is that as part of this onboarding process, you should also really look into the reporting, what your reporting need is. And that was on the last slide that I shared, because realistically, as the last bit of onboarding before the portal audit, and we'll talk about that next week, but the reporting is where you kind of prove your value.
Yes, yeah, I loved. We had a great podcast with Matt Mullion a while back. I love his approach. What questions, are we trying to answer? And if the system is not answering those questions, then, why are we paying, for the system? Why are we putting the work in? And I love that. And as I've shared that with people, it tends to kind of create some focus on, okay, what are we actually trying to do when we look at a report? Um, so definitely look forward to getting into that with you. Um, and we'll see what this looks like on the other side. I feel like it was valuable. It worked in a lot of ways. We'll definitely have the recording available at the very least, up on YouTube. Um,
And next
and
week you won't be sitting by the
we'll
pool, right?
that is correct.
Yeah.
Lessons learned as we do this all the time. But yeah, man, great as always. And until next week when we get to onboarding and talk about some ports and maybe some audits. Um, you know, uh, think about um, new users as they come in. Like maybe you already have HubSpot, or maybe your partner and you've got somebody new that's um, going to be onboarded soon. Just find some of these opportunities. Where could you be creating more awareness as to what's expected of them, what is available to them in the platform? Find those opportunities and let's grow. Have a great day, everybody.